SeaWorld Entertainment just released a stream of announcements regarding their plans for 2020. We have a new roller coaster coming to every major park next year, and one of the ones that we have to look forward to is going to be Texas Stingray at SeaWorld San Antonio. Now, what makes this one special is this is going to be the tallest, longest, and fastest wooden roller coaster in Texas, taking all of the previous records that were held by Boardwalk Bullet. So I'm going to talk all about that and more in this full in-depth analysis based off of the information that we just learned from SeaWorld San Antonio. Just a few general stats before we continue. We have a height of 96 feet, a drop of 100 feet, top speed of 55 miles per hour, and a track length of 3,379 feet. And this is all done by Great Coasters International GCI, and this is one of their hybrid coasters. It is definitely classified as a wooden coaster, but we've seen them do this before where instead of using a wood structure, they use steel. For instance, the example I always point to for this is Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, which up until now is the only GCI that doesn't have a curved drop, just has a traditional straight down drop, and this one will be the second GCI to have that feature. So already it's fairly unique, and what I like so much about this announcement in particular as opposed to the other new coasters that were announced by SeaWorld is that we actually have a full point of view video to really dissect the layout. Busch Gardens Tampa and SeaWorld Orlando have not released the full POV yet, which for those wanting to know more about Iron Gwazi specifics, I can imagine can be quite annoying. But at least with Texas Stingray, we can take a look at the complete ride from start to finish, which we'll do right now. After you dispatch from the station, you're going to take a right-hand turn and start ascending up your lift hill. Once you've reached the top, you almost do a complete 180 turnaround before descending down your drop. An angle of descent has not yet been released, but just looking at it, it doesn't look particularly steep. I would guess around maybe 50 degrees. I very well could be wrong about that, but that's just taking a guess based off of the information that we've been given. And much like Invader, at the bottom of the first drop, you actually swoop under some pre-existing track. So that could be a nice head chopper moment. No sooner than you hit the ground, you're already working your way back up. At the peak of the hill, you're going to start banking. So up until you start turning, that will be a good moment of airtime. I don't think it'll be the strongest airtime moment of the ride, but a lot of what you'll notice in this coaster is not specifically focused on airtime. Really, there's just a whole lot of bank turns during this ride. And especially during the second half, you're going to be focused on speed. Once you start getting low to the ground, that's when it starts to get good. But let's get to that point first. After that first turn, you then are going to hit your second turn. It kind of does the same thing. You pop up into an airtime moment and then you swoop to the right, except this turn keeps on going, throws you up, and then swiftly turns you to the left. And from here on out, instead of staying with those high banking turns like the first few elements, everything from now on is low to the ground. You're going to take each of the following elements at a lot quicker rate, and everything looks to be a lot snappier. And in my opinion, this is when wooden roller coasters really start thriving. And if this coaster has as many trees around it as this animation is making it seem, that's only going to add to that sensation of just flying through the woods. So getting back to where we were, a left-hand bank levels out, drops you down. If you're in the back row, that's going to be one of your ejector airtime moments, and you swoop then to the left and then sharply to the right. And get used to that because that's pretty much all the second half of this ride is just changing directions. That right bank is going to level out, drop you down into a few small bunny hills, and then take you to the left. Now we have two more ejector hills, a swooping turn to the left, and then in my opinion, what looks like the best moment of this ride. After you level out, you kind of go into a voyage-like turn where you almost do an S-bend, and that's because it actually curves directly under the lift hill. So I think that's another thing that really gives me voyage vibes. A rapid-fire S-bend under the lift hill and then into a tunnel. This is the only tunnel on the coaster, but it's also one of the things that they're really advertising with. This tunnel runs parallel to the bottom of the first drop. You shoot out of that, twist to the right, directly following right up against a turn that you already went through, and you pretty much hug alongside it into the brake run. So it definitely looks like an exciting ride. I personally do not expect it to be the new greatest GCI ever built or anything, but it absolutely looks like it's going to be a great coaster. I'm fully anticipating it to be the best ride at SeaWorld San Antonio because GCI is all about just building quality coasters. They never focus on one-trick ponies, gimmicks, or going all out with the records. Really, the records just happens to be a bonus here. I don't think there's any moments of this coaster that look like they're going to be bad by any means. Something else I thought was cool, to my knowledge this has not been 100% confirmed, however I have heard that this will actually use the final two trains left over from Gwazi. Because Gwazi originally had 4 Millennium Flyer trains, 2 of them are now being used on Invader, and so the other 2 have just been sitting there, so I have heard that they are going to be used for Texas Stingray, which if that's the case, that's awesome. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Let's go. I'm really glad that we're finally getting a GCI in Texas, and I'm sure all the coaster enthusiasts down in San Antonio cannot wait for a ride like this. Coasters in this style are always big crowd pleasers, and as long as SeaWorld maintains the ride well, then it should be running pretty smooth. Just a few other specifics before we wrap it up. This coaster will be located across from the current Turtle Reef area. If you've visited SeaWorld San Antonio within the past year, you're well aware of the location of this ride. They've been building this thing forever, so this coaster did not come as a surprise to anyone. The biggest takeaways from this announcement was the layout and then also the name, Texas Stingray. This name was a surprise. I think a lot of people were expecting this ride to be called The Abyss, which is one of the names that SeaWorld Entertainment trademarked, but that is not the case. They're going with Texas Stingray, and I don't think too many people saw that coming. They kept that name pretty well under wraps. Now, it is definitely a strange name. I had to think about this one for a second because I'm not from Texas. I was like, does Texas even have stingrays? After doing a bit of research, they do, and actually, they're brown. I know when a lot of people think of stingrays, they automatically assume they're going to be blue or gray or something like that. But a lot of the stingrays off of the Gulf Shore in southern Texas are brown, aka around that same color as the wood that they're using for this coaster. So it's not as weird of a name as you'd think. I always find it funny though when coasters like to throw the name of the state that they're in front of it. So it's like, all right, how many coasters have the word Texas in it now? I mean, I guess that makes the name a bit more interesting than if they just called it Stingray. I personally definitely would visualize just the word Stingray as a steel coaster. So maybe Texas Stingray just adds a little bit more interest to it. I personally would not expect too much theming with this ride though. And they've made that pretty clear in the animations. Even if you look at the station, there's nothing in there. That doesn't mean that they couldn't add stuff in later on. But about the only theming I'm really anticipating with this is I wouldn't be surprised if they have maybe like a Stingray pool area right outside the coaster. Something along those lines. As for an opening date, the park was not specific. They did say spring 2020 though. They're pretty far along with this coaster, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see like a March opening. If I had to take a guess, this will probably be the first of the major coasters to open up at SeaWorld next year. So if you're like me, hopefully it gets the gears turning and you're starting to think, okay, now I gotta head down to San Antonio and ride this thing, because it definitely looks good. I imagine it'll be one of the best new coasters to open next year. So I'm very excited for SeaWorld, and GCI looks to be an awesome new addition. So hope you enjoyed this analysis. Make sure to stay tuned for a lot more coverage of roller coasters debuting in 2020 here at Coaster Studios. Hit that subscribe button for a lot more content, and I'll see you guys next time.